Welcome to the S2 Cognition podcast. S2 is the official cognitive evaluation in sports, from youth to pro, where athletes and coaches build to win.
We're glad to have you here on the S2 Cognition podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Harrison Hunter, and today we've got an awesome conversation for you. Ray Gallahan, the head pit crew coach at Team Penske, details the science and selection process behind building a successful pit crew. He explains the roles and responsibilities of different crew members and the cognitive demands that they face during pit stops. Ray also talks about the off-season and in-season maintenance of the pit crew and the challenge of turnover in the industry. He finally shares his insights on the future changes of the industry and the importance of continuity and team chemistry. For those that are new here, welcome. We're excited to have you today, and for those that are returning listeners, we always appreciate your support. To help continue our growth, we ask that you subscribe, rate, and review the show. Enjoy Ray Gallahan. Ray Gallahan, thanks so much for joining us, man. We're excited to have you here. You're a legacy, right, in the NASCAR world. Dad was all around cars. You were all around cars. How much influence did that have in the space that you're in now?
Quite a bit. First of all, thanks for having me on. Growing up, Dad, did quite a bit of racing, and I was at some of the smaller tracks in Florida, New Smyrna Beach, Barbersville. Some of the tracks are actually still there, but he kind of got away from it as he got older, and work kind of took precedent. And in the '90s, NASCAR was blowing up, and some of the guys he actually taught to build motors and some things when he was a lot younger had migrated up here and gotten pretty deep into the sport, and had called him back and said, "Hey, we're having trouble finding good people up here. It's blowing up. We'd love for you to come up here and start working with us." So he moved us up to Mooresville, and it was a massive culture shock for me growing up around palm trees and 15 minutes from the beach. And first time I saw Mooresville, North Carolina, it was about this time of the year, no leaves on the trees and gray. And so we moved up here. He got into racing, and I had no interest getting into it at that time. And actually, quite a while later, before I thought about making my way into the sport. But that's kind of how we got into it. I played a lot of basketball growing up, and a ton of basketball in high school, and kind of burn out on it. Had some small D1 or D2 offers, and didn't take any of them. Kind of got burnt out on playing. Ended up at UNC Charlotte, just playing pickup ball and stuff down there, and kind of just not using any of the athletic ability I was blessed with. And Dad said, you should look into getting into pit crew stuff. And I was kind of against it at the start, and then started thinking about it, looking into some of the salaries that guys were making, and they were starting to creep up into the area that made it interesting. And got an opening at a place called Jasper Motorsports, which Penske Racing actually ended up buying. And that's kind of how I got made my way into the sport.
And
That's
for
amazing.
those that don't know, you are how tall, Ray?
6'4".
6'4", big
Yeah.
fella.
Beast.
Not big enough.
Yes.
I played underneath the basket in high school. I was really good at scoring down there, and so the coach wouldn't let me play on the perimeter. Just didn't get enough looks on the perimeter game to make anything of it. But
How many career championships do you have just in totality for racing?
have been directly involved with 3. Was there obviously for 2012 when Brad won it, but wasn't directly involved with that one. But fueled Joey's car in 2018, and then have coached for the last two years.
So for the audience, for Brandon and myself, the inexperienced NASCAR people that will hear this podcast, can you explain all the science that goes into the selection of the pit crew? How you guys develop them into putting the perfect team together, all of the things that go into your selection process. Just break it down for us if you don't mind.
Sure. So that's obviously evolved tremendously over the last probably decade and a half. I've been in the sport since 2004. And when I first started making my way on the pit road, there was a couple guys that had played some sports, and one guy had played college sports. But at this point, if you have not played college sports, you're kind of an outlier. Several of the big teams started really pushing to recruit college athletes, and Penske was one of them. Hendrick Motorsports did a really good job on it, and now everybody's doing it. We're looking for something to set us apart, and so everybody's looking for athletes. And I think the next landscape that's going to set different recruits apart from others is the space between the ears, and us obviously you guys' specialty. Without saying too much about what we look for and things like that, and get myself in trouble. Pit crew guys are a unique. It's kind of a unique tool set. You got to be really athletic, but you got to have a great brain between the ears because it all happens so fast, and you're using equipment. So there's a lot of motor skills involved that aren't always involved in other sports. And then everything happens so fast now with the one lug nut pit stop that we just finished our second year in. All of those read and react points have been condensed, down into the low 9-second range. So everything that was happening when the pit stop was using 5 lug nuts, is condensed so much down to so much, and all of those reaction points take place in a tenth or less of a second now, whereas you had a little bit more than that during 5 lug, and it was a little bit easier if somebody wasn't really sharp upstairs to make a career out of it.
Ray, I know you don't want to give away too much about, especially what you're looking for how guys operate, but I was completely blown away just by even the physical characteristics. You guys talk about the difference between a rear changer and a front changer and a gas man and a jack man, and just what you guys are looking for the, I mean, I was completely blown away where you're like, oh no, he's too short. Oh no, he's too tall. I was like, okay, so there's actual, like, there's a fit here, and a lot of folks who listen to us are involved in pro sports. And as every position on the football field, they're looking for, specific hand size, specific height, weight, all of those sorts of things. Talk to us just a little bit about even just the different positions within the pit crew. I don't even know that we're that familiar with just the different positions and what these guys do.
Sure. So there's 5 men that are allowed over the wall. There's a fueler, and per NASCAR rules, he can only fuel the car. I would love to see them change that because there's a lot of creative things we can do to make the stop even funner if we were able to use him. But he just gasses the car, so and that's a challenging job now too because the fuel cans are regulated to flow a certain amount, and now that the stops are faster, they have a lot less time to get gas in the car. And then starting at the front of the car, there's a front changer who jumps out in front of the car. He's going to take the lugs off and pull both front tires and tighten the lugs once the new wheels are put on. There's a carrier who stands on the ground as the car's coming in with 2 tires in his hand. He carries both right side tires out to the outside part of the car, and he's got to run across the nose as it's coming in with those tires. That's a job that I would never want to do. They kind of weighted down by a couple 45-pound tires, and now you got a 3,600-pound race car driving at you with other cars on pit road as well. And then there's a jack man. He's going to run out across the car as well with a jack in his hand. The jack doesn't weigh that much anymore, so that's a lot of people used to like, oh, that jack's got to weigh a lot, and that's impressive. But the tools have been so refined to where it's really made that part not as impressive. But he's going to jack the car up, put the right front on that the carrier had set there. As soon as he puts the right front on, he's going to come back to the jack, and hopefully the right rear is tight at that point too, and immediately break the jack loose and then run to the left side of the car, jack the left side of the car up, and then put the left rear on, and then read both left side tires when they're tight. Then he drops it, and the stop's done. On the back of the car, the rear changer is going to chase the car down as it comes into the stall, and he's going to do the same thing that the front changer did with the rear tires, and that's all your guys, 5 of them.
How long does that average pit stop?
I would say the going rate right now is about 9.5. Certainly, there's been some faster ones, and I think the fastest stop we've done in our sport right now is 8.6. The 14 car did it this year at one of the races. There's been quite a few groups have gotten into the 8s now. Last year it was only 2 teams, and so as the sport kind of makes its way down the time range there, I think you'll see a lot more eights this season. But nine's kind of the going rate. The low nines is the target right now, and being consistent in that time range.
So essentially, you're changing 4 tires, putting in 100 pounds of gas, and making subtle adjustments to the tilt of the vehicle in less than 10 seconds.
Correct. Yeah. And we don't get to
That's
start on the
ridiculous.
ground. A lot of the other motorsports pit crews like F1 and all, they're already positioned at their cars. And we're coming off the wall as the car's coming in. They most of the time have 4 guns, and so it cuts the stop down about by half. I think an open wheel pit stop, a good one's 4 or 5 seconds.
Man.
But we only got 2 guns, so I would like to see them do their stop with 2 guns and see where we shake out.
So, Ray, one of the most fascinating positions to me in pit row, and I could be wrong here, but the Jackman just seems like he's got a lot going on. And I'd love to, without really getting into the weeds, I'd really love to talk about not only his responsibilities and duties, but from a cognitive perspective, what all is involved here. Because, I mean, the guy seems like he has to sort of really time when he jumps over the wall. He's got to judge angles getting around the car. He's got to moderate force, jacking up the car. He's actually involved in changing a tire. Then he's got to go around to the other side of the car, keep everything in his periphery. There's just a lot going on. Am I wrong here, or does this guy have a lot of responsibility, not just from a cognitive perspective, but just managing the whole team?
Yeah, he's got a full plate for sure, and it's I don't love football comparisons, but there's a lot of comparisons with the quarterback, and I think rightfully so, because it's really hard to make speed without a great jackman. One that's obviously foot speed fast and physically athletic, but also able to manage a stop and to go over all those those small mesh points where we can have mistakes at, and he's involved in almost all of them. So just going off through the stop, for example, right when he comes off the wall, car's going to come by him, and we want him setting the jack. So he's watching the jack stop come by, and he should have the jack out of his hand minimum with the car at 0. There's a handful of guys who are able to do that while the car is still technically moving, and to have the jack plate hitting the peg at 0 so that he's jacking it up while the front changer's pulling that lug nut off, because the front changer is going to be waiting for him to have that right front end, and jackman's your limiting force at that point. So the faster he can get the car up, he's got to make sure his handle's tight on the jack, because if the handle's like, there's so many places where your hands come off the jack where you can loosen it. Those are all a sticking point in it. And then he's got to come off the jack, grab the wheel out of his peripheral, and now he's looking at the hub to get the wheel on, indexing the hub. He's got your spatial recognition and understanding the angles of the camber on the hub, and all that stuff is all got to happen there. And you know tenths of a second for each step. And then after he's hung the wheel, he's coming back to the jack, and now he's got to read out of his peripheral, was there any issues on either hub? And he's got probably less than a tenth to read that out of his peripheral, because I need him to drop the jack immediately if there was none. Like he should have no time to ever stop moving during the stop. After he's hung the right front, should come back, drop the jack immediately, unless there was an issue and he's got to read that and manage it in real time. That's all on his plate on the right side. Now you're hauling the mail around the car, and like Brandon, you alluded to, there's angles and steps and things that we're trying to get him to set himself up for his left side jack set, which is really tough, because he's coming around the car in such a manner where visually he can't see the jack stop on the left side until he is at the point where he's got to throw the jack and get to the pump on it. So there's a even less amount of time where he's able to recognize his aim point on the left than there is on the right. And that the left side's really where they make their money, because the left rear's got to be indexed. He's got to jack the left side of the car up, index the left rear wheel, and get back to the jack to drop it, all in one motion. After he's indexed that wheel, this is the point of the stop where it can become a really big catastrophe, because if you didn't get a lug nut seated right or a wheel seated right, and you drop the jack, hopefully your driver can stop before he leaves pit road. But either way, you've cost your team probably 2 laps of a penalty with the wheel coming off. If the wheel comes off on the racetrack, it's a 2-lap penalty, and you and your tire changer are suspended for 2 weeks. So now I've
Oh,
got
goodness.
backups in for the next couple of weeks as well. So there's a lot on his plate. There's some other stuff that we could get into if you want to with him specifically, but that's kind of the broad view of what all is going on there.
Right. So obviously, you guys are hoping for perfection, and we're talking about these really short time windows, and obviously, you're practicing to perfection. What what percentage of the time does stuff go wrong? Like, I don't know. I mean, I could imagine, a tire, that you're throwing away, spinning around and coming back into your field of vision. I could imagine a guy just tripping, or I don't know, it's just something not going right. How often does that happen?
I would say generally probably 90, I don't know, it's a high 90% of the time range. You have something come up during the pit stop. I think if
Wow.
you hit an 8-second stop, then everything went perfect. You could probably say that for a 9 flat or even a 9-1, but generally speaking, there's something that has to be managed um, to keep yourself from getting into serious trouble. Hopefully, you're trying to keep your mistakes in the high nines, low 10-second bracket, but sometimes that's not feasible either. And managing an 11-second stop at that point becomes optimum rather than having a wheel come off or
Right.
actual loose wheel on the track and your driver having to come back down and pit. So pretty often we have stuff happen.
Without revealing too much of Team Penske here, it sounds to me, as inexperienced as I am in this realm, that might be the most important position on that team. How much goes into the solidification of that position, and then building the team around that player or that
That's
athlete?
that's probably that's probably the entirety of it right now. You have to have
Mm,
that spot filled, and it's a very scarce position as well.
mm,
Um, despite our sport's best efforts to go and recruit and bring these players in, we've just ran into some challenges finding the right people. To go back to something Brandon hit on way earlier in the conversation, what we're looking for specifically, like we're looking at hip heights now, we're looking at arm lengths, hand size, all that kind of stuff, to fit the mold for it. Because you could have a guy like myself who's 6'4", um, and the way my hips and my body's put together, it takes me a lot longer to compact down into the wheel well to get my tire in to my hub, whereas somebody who might be 6'2" and not built proportionally the same way I am, his body's able to get that tire in when he bends down and squats at the
mm.
waist to get the tire in. It takes him less compaction of his the way he's built than somebody who's a lot taller and lankier, so to speak.
So Ray, we've talked about these five pit crew guys contributing. How much does the driver contribute to a successful pit stop?
He's got quite a big part of it as well. If we're trying to be on the car and touching it, our front changer needs to be engaged and pulling the lug off at zero. I want Jackman to have, jack underneath the car at zero. When I say zero, that's, just car is finally stopped. It's not moving at all. As soon as it decelerates to zero, everybody's got to be on it. Well, if he doesn't hit the mark that he's trying to hit with the car, then all of my guys got to adjust, accordingly. And if it's a 2 to 3 foot adjustment, you're not going to second off your time easily. And that's not hard to do for a driver. They're really, got a lot going on visually too, and then trying to hit that mark on a pit road that's really busy is a huge challenge, and somewhere, a space that a lot of people are working on right now to try and maximize.
So from my naive understanding of it, it seems like you guys work in groups of pit crew and then the drivers, and they have their crew chiefs and things like that. How much interaction is there on a typical week between the driver and crew chief set of skills and yourself who's managing all the pit crew? And is there any integration from week to week about, hey, here's some adjustments we can make, or how can we make you drivers better, and drivers, how can we help with the pit crew? I mean, how does that interaction work?
Yeah, so that's also changed a lot over, I would say, probably the last 5 to 7 years. Whereas the old mentality was the driver's going to do what he's going to do, and wherever the car's at, we just want you guys to pit it and be perfect.
Yeah.
And as this part of our sport has evolved, there's a lot more communication, strategy, and practice on language that the crew chief uses with the driver, where you put your signboard, how you're doing your tape, all these little visual cues, and then actually active practice with specific drivers and teams. Doesn't happen every week, but it does happen quite a bit to try and get all that stuff fine tuned and polished up.
So are teams actively recruiting at like sporting events, all-star games, and things like that? Or are you guys going out to look for college athletes?
Yes, and right now there's still a pretty big wall as far as the reach and exposure of NASCAR. I think it's grown a good bit as far as the versatility in the fan base, but a lot of guys that we talk to have never watched a race, and we kind of got to build up the interest, from ground zero to get them in the door. But as you get guys in the door and as they start having fun and making some money, they talk to their buddies that might have been underclassmen and they're graduating, and so then just interest kind of snowballs as we get people in the door.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about, going back to your 9.5, potentially 8 seconds of doing all of those things. You talk about processing and what people are having to do. Everyone's got their role. I mean, it truly is like the 5 finger hand thing. Everyone has a role, right? And if you do it, what you have to do, there might be certain specialties to each person and what they're having to accomplish. How did you go about, thinking about good fit, your team assembly? What are some of those things when you're putting a team together that you guys look for?
Yeah, it's a great question, because that is where everything's at now. The stop physically is not as demanding as the 5 lug stop. The wheels are a little bit lighter, and there's probably a decent sized population of people who could, athletically complete the stop in a decent fashion. Where we're finding the tricky part is do they also have the tools mentally to make all those reads and process all that in an amount of time that is, we're talking tenths of seconds and sometimes under tenths, with a lot of consequences when you miss those read times, because the
Mhm.
driver's trained as soon as the jack drops, on the left side, he's gone. So you don't have the ability to fix anything before the car leaves if you made a mistake. Now you're looking at wheels coming off, or catastrophic race changing events if we do make a wrong read, or process something improperly. So that, in my opinion, that's where the whole game's going, and that's the next frontier on pit road is how can we identify those markers and who's going to be better at those things than others.
Ray, I really want to touch on something that was really interesting to me, and I know that it's phased out now, but these guys who were doing the 5 lug, you talked about, there's a real motor and tactile, but also like this awareness of not just where the lugs are in space, but having a sense of what the tightness was. And when we first talked about this, you were saying that sometimes these guys, it took 3 to 5 years just to develop that sense. And so you guys were investing 3 to 5 years of time when ultimately, oh, this guy is not going to work out. He just can't get it down quickly. What was that process like for you guys? How do you actually train these aspects? I mean, I've sat and watched practice, and I know all the technology that goes into it these days. But as you guys were evolving, how do you guys train from a day-to-day basis?
So 5 lug was a lot different than what we do now, for sure. Especially training tire changers in particular. It just took a human mind a lot longer to develop hitting those 5 lugs, and we were trying to do that somewhere around 8 tenths of a second. So you've got your gun spooled up. You got the kick of the gun is in your hands, right? Because it's got a lot of torque on it. So you squeeze the trigger and it wants to jerk your hands around. So you got to use some strength to hold it. And then you're just trying to hit that pattern in 8/10 of a second. And there was guys who could do it in faster than that. And your brain,
So 5 lug nuts in less than a second.
yes, and your brain is tracking right each lug, and you don't realize if one broke loose and came off until you've gotten to the next one. So there's probably quite a bit of cool stuff cognitively going on during that era as well that just weren't really thinking about or tapping into. But for to train those motor skills, it just took a lot longer than it does with one. Um, the difficulty now is training guys to read that one lug nut in less than a tenth. Um, and there is some motor skills still involved, but obviously you can imagine it's a little bit easier to hit one hub as opposed to 5 smaller studs. Um, Now the difficulty lies in the speed of the stop and the processing part of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about because you guys are just like every other sport. You have an in season and you have an off season. What is the difference? I mean, is there pit crew maintenance as they're going through the season? What are the changes we're going to make? The assumption of hey, we didn't like how we did this race, so the next race we're looking at making these adjustments. And can you talk about the in season maintenance for the pit crew versus the out of season? What does their off season look like?
Sure. So we'll start with the off season because that's what we're in right now. I think it depends on the season you had. We did a little bit more last off season because I didn't think we had a great 2022. 2023, 2023 we were a little better, and I don't think we have as much fundamental stuff to fix as far as fundamental execution of the movements and techniques. So we've taken a little bit more time off in November this year to try and heal bodies up. And honestly, I think the mind healing and the mind refreshing is a bigger point of emphasis for me, just because we'll start first week of January and we don't stop practicing until November 7th, the first week of November, somewhere in there. So it's
Man.
like 43 weeks, and it just grinds you down. It's not, like I said earlier, it's not as physically demanding as other sports, but you don't get a break. There's a week or two where we will take off, but your brain never kind of leaves work. It doesn't really relax from the season and all the storylines going on. So I, my approach has been for November, December to try and get the brains refreshed, and that way when we come back in January, we can hit it hot and heavy. Everybody's popping, everybody's excited and ready to get going again.
Do you have
Cool.
like a report date? I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you have a
No.
report date when those guys come back?
Yeah, it's usually first week of January. This year is going to be on Wednesday since we don't get back to the second, being how New Year's falls. And then we kind of, not to get into too much detail, but we kind of start at the bottom and work on fundamentals as the weeks go by, and hopefully we're ready for Daytona 3 to 4 weeks before Daytona, and if we're not, we can make some adjustments. But unless you have a lot of new people, you're generally just kind of to refreshing everybody and make sure we're sharp before Daytona. You don't want to wear everybody out in January unless you really need to. If the production's not there, then the work's got to be done, and we got to keep practicing. But um, I guess more or less it depends on the group. But I'm always got an eye for how hard am I pushing guys and making sure I have their bodies fresh, you know, towards the end of the season when the championship's on the line.
And is there a lot of turnover in that space? Like you mentioned a couple minutes ago that, yeah, if we got a lot of new guys, man, we're really having to start from the ground up. Or if we've got a pretty familiar team, a lot of people back, we just working on, getting the feel and the maintenance. Is there a lot of turnover in this space?
There has been. We have had a little bit at Team Penske. Some other race teams, there's been a lot more since Next Gen started. The one lug nut pit stop, it's blessed some guys' careers and really hurt some other guys' careers. It was a massive paradigm shift to where you had a lot of guys who were stars in the 5 lug system and really got phased out during this time. And so there has been some new faces coming on. I also think the wear and tear of the stop being faster is going to probably lend to some careers not being as lengthy. So I do think you'll see a lot more newer faces more often than we have in the past.
What is the average length of stay or career of a pit crew?
I would say generally it's been, if you're really good at what you did, 10 to 15 years. Sometimes guys made it beyond those numbers, but I think you'll see those come down for jackmen and carriers. There's quite a bit of wear and tear on the back and the hips and shoulders at those two positions. I think changers you'll still be able to get, you know, 10, 15 plus years out of your body. I don't think the stop didn't do anything physically to their jobs to make it more strenuous on their body. So I still think that'll be an option for them. But I think jackman and carriers, you'll probably see that number be more likely around 8 to 10 years rather than getting up there into the 15s.
And you guys have, I know you have three major cars on the NASCAR series. And so you're managing all three of those teams, correct? Which would be 15 members. Do you guys have like a development system or minor leagues, or how does one work their way up to Joey Logano, the cup winner, to his car?
Yeah, so that the Xfinity system used to be that feeder league for us, where we'd have younger picker guys on Xfinity cars, and they're still doing 5 lugs, so we don't have that luxury right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really made my job challenging as far as getting new guys experience and getting people to the racetrack, because for instance, I had a tire changer last year, really talented fella, and I couldn't get him to an Xfinity race because I wasn't going to teach him 5 lug. It was going to be a waste of time for me to do that because we don't race 5 lug at Team Penske, and it would have took 2 to 3 years probably just to get him to the racetrack and all that with 5 lug. So you're kind of looking for opportunities on other teams where if they had a suspension and they're short a changer, hey, you want to use my guy here, get him a couple races under his belt, and now he's got some experience and idea on what to do there. We try to put them in different positions during practice and different environments that we maybe semi simulate the racetrack, but you can never really replicate game day. But that's about the best we can do right now, and hopefully we've got competent, mentally strong guys that get in there, and the pressure of being fresh at the racetrack and never being there is not too much for them.
I know you've talked about earlier the space of processing being the future of what's happening in the pit crew and NASCAR series. What other changes do you see coming down the pipeline to your industry?
There's been people kicking around trading pit crew guys, and that hasn't happened yet. I don't know that
Oh,
that'll happen this year, but I do think that'll be a thing at some point.
wow.
Um, I think JGR is trying to build a actual standalone training facility for their pit crew guys. It's like most of our training facilities now are usually intertwined with the shop and the race shop and all that. And theirs is going to be a standalone, separate facility. I think you'll see that probably pop up here and there. Obviously, that costs a lot of money, and finding backing for that might
Right.
be a challenge.
There are rules though, right, Ray? I mean, you guys can't go out to a NASCAR track and practice and things like that, right? So you have to have your own sort of facility. Like there's rules that NASCAR governs how much you can practice and access to cars and tracks and all that, correct?
Yeah, so in an interest of keeping the cost down, as so at some point there in the 2000s, the testing costs and things were just getting out of hand.
Mm.
Some of the smaller market teams weren't able to really play ball on that. So now, if you wanted to go like to Charlotte Motor Speedway and run live pit stops, NASCAR would have to be notified, and they'd have to bless it. And I think they want to avoid opening Pandora's box. And okay, you're going down there to practice pit stops, but maybe the car stays out on the racetrack for a couple extra laps, and the driver gets a couple laps of
Right.
practice there and gives the crew chief some feedback and all that kind of stuff. So, and we don't get to um, own our own tires. Like we've got to get tires from Goodyear, and they don't let the teams keep them anymore. So
Mm.
there's a challenge with that as well. We used to do a lot of that, Brandon, but we don't get to anymore.
2023 or 2024 season, excuse me, right around the corner. What are we looking forward to most? Oh, that face.
Oh, I- I'm excited about having some continuity with the guys that we've got together. Ryan's team, Blaney's team is not going to have any changes. Joey's team has been together for a couple years now, and I think as as you guys well know, when you're in the process of reading and mental processing stuff, having guys that know each other really well, and quarterback knows where his receiver is going to break his route off at because he knows what's going on between his ears and his tendencies. And same thing for us as you work together and get team chemistry built up, and that kind of snowballs on itself, and you get some good momentum on that. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those two groups can do with another year under their belts, and with some cumulative success with the 12 now finally getting over the hump and knocking championship out, seeing where they can get to. And then our two car and our 21 didn't have the seasons that we wanted to have last year, but we're going to push hard in January to make sure those guys are ready, and would like to see those two groups make the next step and kind of get their names into the upper echelon of players right now.
I don't remember where I read it, but someone was talking about the single most important factor to success or dynasties. If you look at the dynasties of, the Lakers or the Celtics, maybe even the Warriors and some of these teams, the Patriots, in front office coaching and as players, there was like a central hub of these connectors that were there at every single stop, and the continuity between them over years. You can change pieces around and you can change a couple things here and there, but the people who wrote the rules or check your ego at the door with Tim Duncan and Greg Popovich, they were still running the ship. And I think to your point, man, that's going to be really exciting to see because the continuity aspect is so important.
Yeah, and I think that's an underrated um, dynamic to sports in general. I think we love the flashiness of the combines and the physical testing and that kind of thing, but the team camaraderie and the locker room structure and the leadership and how that fits together is fascinating to me, and I think it's just as applicable on pit road. Sometimes you got to make changes, and those are part of it. But if I can have my way, I'd rather have a group of guys stay together for as long as possible and see where that momentum can carry them.
Okay, Ray, we've moved into the three random and funny questions. Are you ready? These can be rapid
Sure.
fire. These can be long explanation, whatever you're feeling.
Okay.
Um, what is the fastest you've ever been on a track?
142 miles an hour.
Just describe what that's like, please. I mean, does anything go black? There's just no way.
No, it really kind of felt like driving on the interstate. I don't know. Maybe it was just I was ignorant of what I was doing, but wasn't that scary.
Is the
Really?
number one fear that you're just going to crash? I mean, is that the number one fear for
Yeah, I think
drivers?
so. Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's and honestly, probably not until they have a really hard hit. But I think
Yeah.
after that, you remember.
Yeah.
I was doing some initial research. So for question number 2, I hear that people call you Goose, and if that's the case, how did that nickname come about?
So it doesn't have anything to do with Top Gun. It was a former coach of mine called me Ray Goose, like Grey Goose vodka, and
It's
I thought it
okay.
was dumb. I still don't really like the nickname because, like I tell the guys, when I was growing up, Top Gun was a huge movie.
Yep.
Nobody wanted to be Goose.
Yeah.
Goose died. You want to be the guy
That's
flying the
true.
plane and shooting
That's
stuff.
right.
So yeah,
Uh,
Well, I'll
that's
start calling you Maverick.
yeah. Do we need to change this? Is there a way to rectify and maybe give you a new one so that the future can be a new nickname?
I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to be able to lose the name.
Okay. Most exciting challenge for you coming up right now. What are you looking forward to?
Trying to have 4 elite pit crews. Right now, I think we've got 2. I think we're close with the other 2, and we've not ever been fortunate enough at Team Penske to have you know all of our teams be that talented and execute at that level. But I think that's the next challenge for me, and our staff, and then we're excited for it.
What is elite pit crew? What is that? Is that just over the course of the season being consistent? What is reaching that elite pinnacle? What's the objective measure there for you?
So I think that the 9-second average is kind of the target right now, and we had two teams that could crank out 9-second averages pretty easily at the end of the season, and the 2 and the 21 struggled at that, and I think the name of the game with the current pit stop is how often can you produce your high level production stops, like how often can you hit the low nines without getting into the 11s, 12s, and catastrophe stops. And that's kind of the name of the game. So trying to get our last two groups up to that level. One of them is really consistent and not that fast, and the other one is super fast and does this. So if I can get both of them for different reasons, kind of in the middle, I think we'll be in shape.
He is Ray Gallahan, head of the pit crew at Team Penske. Thanks so much for your time and sharing some wisdom and shedding some light on a really cool processing element that I don't think gets talked about enough. So thanks for sharing.
Harrison, Brandon, it was great to be on, and appreciate it so much.
Thanks for listening to the S2 Cognition podcast. If you like the content we are putting out, please subscribe with that plus sign at the top of your app, leave a review about the episode, and share it with a friend. Follow us on Twitter at S2Cognition or Instagram at S2.Cognition. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, please visit our website at www.s2cognition.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening to the S2 Cognition podcast. I'm your host, Harrison Hunter, signing off for now. We'll talk to you guys soon.